Now, let's get to the real meat of this conversation.
Yeah, I pointed out what we're going to talk about to Adam, and he was instantly furious. So that's the conversation we're about to have.
So for our loyal fans, you guys may recall an episode a few months back. It might have been about a year at this point, where we talked about Rolling Stone's 100 greatest singers of all time. And I would say that we were pretty fair and even-handed on our impression of the list, and that it was a terrible list.
Yeah.
And commentary is exactly that. It's just our opinions on things. But it was a very lively conversation when that came out. We got lots of DMs and comments about our thoughts and then other people's thoughts. I was not prepared for the number of Celine Dion fans that were out there, but man, they are out there and they feel strongly about lots and lots of things.
Yeah.
So this go around, not to be outdone, Rolling Stone decided to throw down the gauntlet again and release their list of the 250 greatest guitar players of all time. Now, they had put out a list of the 100 greatest ones a few years back, and the people who were in charge of compiling that list were other guitar players. It was like, old classic rock musicians. And they got a lot of flack because it was pretty homogenous as far as the kind of musician that made the list. This go round, they basically interviewed or surveyed their editors and writers to come up with something that was a bit more diverse. And I would say in their defense that it was much more diverse.
That mission was accomplished, I would say.
It covered a lot of ground, and it wasn't just the usual suspects in this kind of thing. That being said, there is a lot of stuff to talk about on this list.
Yeah.
So before we get into talking about the actual rankings, I'm going to quote the article that starts this whole thing off, which is basically explaining the way that they compiled this list. In making the list, we tended to value heaviness over tastiness, feel over polish, invention over refinement, risk takers and originators more than technicians. We also tended to give an edge to artists who channeled whatever gifts God gave them into great songs and game-changing albums, not just impressive playing.
Yeah.
So, Kay.
Yeah, fine. And so greatness and game-changingness are qualities that we're after here in making this list. That's just a thing to bear in mind, I think.
Yeah. So Dan and I poured over this list, and it is extensive. It's 250.
Yep.
And, they each have their own little write-ups. So we kind of put them into different classifications. And should we go over all of those at the top so that people can kind of like...
Yeah, let's just give the roadmap here.
So we have low rankings, as in guitar players we think should be higher up in the list.
Somebody got robbed, yeah.
High rankings where we feel like musicians may be a little too far up the chain compared to their contemporaries.
Yeah.
Fair rankings, believe it or not many of those.
No.
And then there's something around duos that we'll get into once we get to that set. Bandmates, which I thought was kind of an interesting split to figure out if there's two guitar players in the band, how do they fare against one another? And then we've got an honorable mentions or glaring omission list, people who didn't make the cut that we think should have. So let's go ahead and get the outrage just ripped right open.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about guitar players that are too low on the list, in our opinion. Now, I'll go ahead and let you kick this one off.
Well, they kicked it off. Number 250, last one on the list, but the bottom guitarist on the list is Andy Summers from The Police. And that is freaking criminal. There's just no world in which Andy Summers is below, 100. I started the article mad.
Yeah, the text that I sent to Dan was, I'm barely into this list and I'm furious, all caps.
Right.
And this was the initial impression that was just like, oh my, like, how could they do that?
Yeah.
Again, using their own criteria against them.
Yeah.
This doesn't make sense.
Right. And then 205, Eric Johnson. You got to be kidding me.
Outrageous.
We may not have a lot of good argumentation in this episode. It may just be a lot of spluttering, but
yeah, it's
honest
just,
to God, go listen to Avia Musicom.
Come on.
Listen to Avia Musicom and you'll be like, how is that the 205th best guitarist? That's insane.
Well, I guess the other way to think about it is that, like, you think about the G3 tours where they have all of these virtuosos doing these package tours.
Yes.
He's the lowest on the list by like a lot.
Well,
And I don't think that's remotely justified
no,
or fair.
by name, maybe, but all of them revere him.
Yeah. If you're talking about players that got their inspiration from him. That being said, Joe Bonamassa is not on this list at all.
Right, that's true.
And I mean, anybody copping his licks more than anybody.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Yeah.
And not too far ahead of him at 197 is Nuno Betancourt from Extreme.
How can that be?
Again, using their own criteria against them, that makes absolutely no sense. A really great example of that is the fact that somebody who is much higher up on the list, Brian May, has been interviewed about how virtuosic and impressive Nuno is as a player. And that's Brian May saying that.
Yeah.
It's absolutely outrageous.
Yeah. Yeah. We could literally stop and splutter over every person we pulled out of here, but maybe we just bang some names until we get a little higher on the list where it gets a little more argumentative.
Dimebag Darrell at 131. Joe Walsh above him at 130. Steve Vai is 127.
Ridiculous.
Steve Howe from Yas 126.
Yeah. Lindsey
Buckingham. Django Reinhardt is only number 70.
Yeah.
Frank Zappa barely cracking the top 50. And these last three I do kind of want to talk about.
It's where it gets painful for me. Yeah. Yeah. Because 28 is David Gilmour. Any world in which David Gilmour is not in the top 10 guitarists ever, it makes no sense to me.
Of all of the players on this list, like Dave Gilmour would be on my Mount Rushmore
for sure
of like influential guitar players that are a big deal. Him being that, I mean, again, he's above a lot of really phenomenal musicians.
Yeah.
But there's also a handful of folks above him, higher up towards number one, that have no place being there.
Yeah. Yeah. And if our rubric here is great songs and game-changing albums, almost name somebody better.
Absolutely. So the other two these were low rankings, and we compiled this list together.
Yeah.
Stevie Ray Vaughan at number 20 and Prince at number 14. And I'm going to say, I don't think those are low. I think those are fair.
Really?
If you're looking at the Pantheon, I don't necessarily take umbrage with either of those based on who is above them.
Yeah. Look, so
just
as a preview of coming attractions, you look at the top 10 and there's some quibbles, but they're the top. They kind of got the very top of the list right-ish.
More or less.
I just feel like SRV and Prince belonged in that top 10. I don't know. It's arguable for sure. Once you get into inside the top 25, it's probably all a wash, maybe. But it hurt my feelings to say Stevie Ray Vaughan at 20.
All I had to do was look at the other blues players that I put above him.
Yeah.
That's to me where I felt like it was kind of justified.
Yeah, I can see that argument.
So that's the way that I feel about it. But everybody has their own feelings about this.
Yes.
So on the flip side of this, we're going to now go into musicians ranking too high.
Yeah.
And a lot of these are going to have another artist to contrast, like so-and-so's above somebody else. And I think that is a great way to put these rankings in perspective. Starting the list off at 129 is Nita Strauss. No skin off her back. Nita Strauss is a fantastic musician, but she's above a lot of people, including Jennifer Batten, who we interviewed, and she is on this list.
Yes.
Number 237, which a little low, considering the fact that she could hang with the one and only Jeff Beck, who is number 5, by the way.
Yeah. Plus, Michael only had his world's choice of guitarists, and she's who he picked. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And she's above Steve Vai.
Nita is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just I feel a way about that.
Seems wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. Above her is Kim Thale from Soundgarden, also above Steve Vai.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's got a unique playing style. No argument there. But considering that Nuno Betancourt is lower down the list, Eric Johnson's lower down the list, Dimebag, all of these guys are below him as far as the ranking goes. Another one that I took issue with, Kerry King from Slayer, number 100, above Dimebag Darrell at 131. Criminal.
Shouldn't be.
I don't.
Yeah.
Again, Kerry King responsible for one of the worst recorded guitar solos ever made. No Sleep Till Brooklyn. Even if it's a joke, it was terrible.
Yeah.
Horrible, horrible, horrible. Now, these are going to be a little testy.
And I put these on there, and I have a reason. The next two that I listed there are Kurt Cobain at 88 and Willie Nelson at 77. And my issue is that what you think of them as is songwriters, performers, not really guitar players. I mean, they both tell you they're not at the top of the craft, right? And that was kind of part of Cobain's whole thing, was that he wasn't. And so among the best songwriters of history, for sure.
Yeah.
But to list them this high in a list of world's best guitar players feels wrong to me.
Well, you know, in Rolling Stone's defense, we also tended to give the edge to artists who channeled whatever gifts they had into great songs and game-changing albums.
Fair.
There's a fair amount of those between the two of them. On that note, Jay Mascis is above Kurt Cobain. I don't believe that to be the case. John Mayer is number 61. Some people may feel like that's the right spot, but I don't necessarily feel like he belongs on this list maybe at all.
Right.
Don't hate me.
Right.
I don't know. He's a very talented player, but like he got famous for aping other people's stuff. He's a blues player, but he's got a very impressive improvisational repertoire. It's bore itself out with Dead & Co. So that might just be my personal bias, but I feel like John Mayer at 61 is too high. Let's see who else. Jack White at 32, way too high.
Way too high.
Also St. Vincent at 26.
26 is high for St. Vincent, I think. I think you're right.
Above David Gilmour.
Above David Gilmour. Yeah, that doesn't seem right.
Again, no shade. Annie, she's a Berkeley trained musician, incredibly talented, but feels a little high. And the biggest question mark for me is number 17, which is Mother Maybelle Carter.
Yeah.
Of like the Carter family.
Yeah. Listen, crucial seminal Americana musician, you know, very important in the history of blues and folk and, you know, country and everything that kind of emerged out of early American music. But yeah, I don't, can she hang at number 17 as a guitarist? That's tough. And the photo they picked of her has her with an auto harp.
Yeah, she's playing an auto harp.
So,
which does not,
it
it doesn't do a very good job of justifying their choice.
Now you picked one here at number 3 that I'm going to need you to justify to me.
Okay, again, this is just my personal opinion, but number 3 is Jimmy Page. And I don't see it, especially considering the other contemporaries of his much lower down the list.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
I mean, in terms of influence, it's hard to argue though.
Sure, but like Keith Richards is number 15.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, which sloppy blues guy are you going to go with, right?
Right. It just doesn't. Led Zeppelin, one of my favorite bands,
for sure.
But him being above some of the Eddie Van Halen's number 4,
right?
And I understand, like if you're looking at the pantheon of things, you have to look at the people who came first, and if they didn't exist, would these other people exist? And does Jimmy Page deserve to be in the top 20? Absolutely. Top 10?
Probably.
Arguably, yes.
Probably.
Number 3?
Yeah. The thing about Zeppelin is it's one of those bands that's greater than the sum of its parts, right? And
100%.
You know, Jimmy absolutely was a massive contribution to that, but it wouldn't have been what it was without the other guys, and he wouldn't have had the opportunity he had to be what he was without being in that collection of guys. And so,
100%.
you know, him as a standalone fella being number 3, I guess I get you. I'm convinced. You sold me.
It's a hot take. I fully admit it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Let's just kind of disrobe this negativity, this controversy.
Let's talk about this group is fair rankings. This is the balm for our soul section of the podcast.
Yes,
yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
So I'll go. You did the majority of these, so I'll go ahead and let you kind of run through your list.
Sure. So 59 was Robert Fripp, who is probably one of the most inventive guitarists that's ever picked up an electric. Maybe Django was better more inventive on acoustic, but Fripp dug deep on a lot of things. If you're not familiar with his League of Crafty Guitarists project, you really need to be, because it's really something. 53 Trey Anastasio, and I feel kind of the same way, like inventive, creative, blazed a lot of new ground, picked up the torch that was there in the jam band world and ran with it hard. And 53 feels about right for both his chops, which are massive, and what he did as a songwriter. Huge. The Edge at 45. A lot of people feel like the Edge is overrated. I am not one of them. I think that his approach is really unique. I think that his voice, his tone and but not just tone, like his choices he makes are really, really creative and unique. And 45 feels like it does justice to him without overplaying that.
My only gripe is that 46 is Frank Zappa.
Yeah. And that's definitely an underbid.
If you take them out of the ranking and you just say this person is ranked this, and you're not looking at the list, you're like, yeah, that seems fair. But yeah, when you start comparing them to the people above and below them, you're like, wait a second.
Right. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. You're right.
But I mean, like the Edge, whether you want to admit it or not, that playing style and the way that he leveraged effects is massively influential on modern guitar players.
Totally.
In a way that, like, I don't think a lot of people bother to dig into.
Agreed. Yeah, for sure.
Bo Diddley at 41, I thought was a good pick.
Yep.
I feel like the blues players are pretty much where they should be in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
Robert Johnson was number 16. And it's interesting that Keith Richards is number 15, because if you're looking at without one, there wouldn't be the other.
No.
Robert Johnson being the prototype, the one who influenced all of these other players.
Right.
Most of the people who cop to that are on this list. You've got Clapton at 35. You got, I don't know. I think Clapton at 35 is fair. His early body of work was definitely influential. Sometimes you live long enough to become the villain of your own story. I don't know.
That's true.
I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah.
Also wanted some honorable mentions. John Frusciante at 25, I think, is totally justifiable. I think his body of work speaks for itself. He's a massively talented person. And I'll leave that last one off because we'll probably talk about the top 5 in order.
Okay.
But
we'll come back to that one, but it is probably the fairest of the rankings of the whole thing.
I think so.
Yeah.
So something about the way that this list was created, they did a lot of these groupings of guitar players. So basically they were like, maybe these guitar players on their own weren't enough to make the list, but the way that they played together in a band is something worth talking about.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of duo rankings is what we refer to them.
Yeah. Typically we're coupling the lead and the rhythm guitarist in a band together.
Right.
Or bands that pass it back and forth, putting them together as a pair and kind of considering them as a unit, which in some cases made some sense and on others was weird. Some
examples: 225, you got Wayne Kramer and Fred Smith from the MC5. 219, Glenn Tipton, KK Downing from Judas Priest. But there were also a bunch of these where it didn't seem fair that they put them together because each of the individual guitarists should have been recognized on their own. And a couple of those I just want to draw attention to. 124, Mike McCready and Stone Gossard. They've done great work outside of just Pearl Jam. Gary Rossington and Alan Collins and Leonard Skinner, I think that is a massive oversight, putting them together. You had mentioned Johnny Greenwood and Ed O'Brien from Radiohead.
Yep.
The other ones that I felt I was very upset by. 38, Angus and Malcolm Young, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Both of them deserve their own individual spots on this list. Malcolm Young's contribution to AC/DC cannot be understated. He is the reason why AC/DC sounds the way that AC/DC sounds.
Yeah.
And then at 23, James Hetfield, Kirk Hammett. That didn't feel right. I feel like James Hetfield, from a rhythm guitar player standpoint, he basically wrote the book on aggressive metal rhythm playing. Like, he deserves to be on there by himself.
Yep, agreed.
Moving into some other fun categories, let's talk about bandmates. I thought that was kind of a fun way to look at it. So in the event that they didn't necessarily group them together, the distance between one bandmate and the other, I just thought was kind of an interesting observation. So we mentioned earlier that Jennifer Batten is on the list at 237. David Williams, who is also a guitar player for Michael Jackson, was 232. And he has the distinction of playing on the majority of those records. So him being above Jennifer Batten, I think, is justifiable based on the criteria that they gave.
Yeah.
I still think Jennifer at 237 is a little low, but that's just my personal opinion. The Runaways is another interesting one. So Lita Ford and Joan Jett are both on the list separately. Lita at 192, and then Joan Jett at number 76. So that's a bit of a stretch. Both had great solo careers. Joan's probably a bit more successful over the course of time. She was still charting. She's still putting records out that, people are stoked on. And I thought this was kind of interesting. The Beatles.
Yes.
So you've got Paul McCartney at 173, John Lennon at 159, and then above him at number 31, you have George Harrison. So it's a bit of a spread, but I think those are justified. I feel like they all have their own contribution to the band's legacy, but also their own solo output. Totally fair, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And there were a lot of tunes that it turns out, like, I didn't know, hey, that was really John playing that lead or whatever.
Right.
So the other two certainly contributed lead work, and as a guitar band, they were all there doing it. So,
And then this one kind of bugs me. It's the Allman Brothers.
Yeah.
You got Dickie Betts at 145 and then Dwayne Allman at 10.
10.
And it's funny because if you read the article under Dickie Betts, they literally quote Dwayne Allman as saying, "I'm the famous one, but Dickie's the good one."
Yeah.
So, I mean, straight
What's
from the
up?
horse's mouth.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's probably the widest swing. Maybe I didn't do the math.
Me neither, but it's a big swing.
It's a pretty wide delta, I guess you would say. Now, talking about some of the other things that I was fairly impressed by. We mentioned diversity. You've got world music, you've got a lot of jazz, you've got
a lot of blues.
Yep, and you've got male, female players. But I wanted to draw attention to the younger players, which I appreciated because I feel like you go through these lists and it's the same group of old dudes like on these things over and over again. And so I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 7 what I would consider younger contributors to the list. Number 242 is somebody that I was not familiar with, but she is the youngest on this list. Her name is Lindsay Jordan, and she is the guitar player for a band called Snail Mail. Was not familiar with them,
Right.
but I looked them up because I wanted to find out more about it. And I got to tell you that record that they put out in 2018 when she was 19 years old is phenomenal. And while there's some impressive guitar work on it, it's not flashy in that way. And it's more about the sophistication of her songwriting, which is super, super impressive. If you are remotely into indie rock, go look up Snail Mail. I was absolutely blown away.
Cool.
The second youngest by 6 months is Kingfish at 200. If you have not checked him out, I mean, what a monster musician. Like, just watching him play is just awesome. Guy just exudes the blues and just is really fun to watch. And he's got a signature purple dual humbucker Telecaster that Fender makes. It is rad. It's really cool.
Nice.
Hers on the list at 233. 161, Tim Henson of Polyphia. You've got Yvette Young at 155, and then Tosin Abasi at 99. So, you've got people on this list that are in their early 20s still.
Good upcoming talent.
Which is absolutely something that we should be excited about. I definitely rail against this online a lot, that, we've got to make room for younger players to get into this world, because if we don't, then, more people aren't necessarily going to get in there.
Yep.
So let's go ahead and get into the top 10. I feel like talking about the top 10 is absolutely
it's calling to us
how to wrap this up.
Yep. So we said number 10 is Dwayne Allman, and I guess I'm on board.
I feel like somebody burning out at the height of their fame kind of gives them that kind of legend status.
Right.
But I would say Dwayne Allman's body of work fares that out. I love all of the stuff that he's done.
Yes.
He did.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes. Number 9, Joni Mitchell. Well, listen, I
get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. And I'm going to contradict myself, because just a few minutes ago I talked about how there's some people who are songwriters and not really guitarists. The reality is Joni is both. She did some really creative chord work. It's, she's an acoustic guitar player, so it's not going to burn down she's not going to melt any faces. But go listen to her song Coyote and tell me that that's not some of the most creative guitar songwriting and playing you've ever heard. It's just incredible.
Sure. But I do want to note that Randy Rhoads is number 21.
Yeah, well, fair. Yeah.
Just again, if you take them out of context, it's totally fine.
Maybe it speaks to the breadth of guitar as an instrument. Like, how do you even say what a guitar player is, right?
Right.
So that's probably part of the challenge of putting it. Although I have no quibble with number 8, which is B.B. King. Yeah.
Everybody who's lower down the list has some debt to pay to that man.
For sure.
With the exception of number 68, which is Les Paul.
Right. Who
and
is
then
owed
number 70, Django Reinhardt. But everybody else.
All of this.
For sure.
Number 7, I initially had some quibble with, and then I read the blurb and I was like, oh, I didn't realize he played on all those things. It's Nile Rodgers. And I mostly know Nile Rodgers as kind of a funk and disco producer, more than other things. But the reality
he was way more than Chic.
Way more than Chic.
Way more.
Yeah, I mean, it was when we mentioned that he played those super awesome inversions at the top of Let's Dance by David Bowie. It was like, okay, sold.
Yep.
Sold.
On top of, all of the other stuff that he's
everything
done.
Else. Yeah.
Yeah. Go look up his body of work. It is absolutely
unbelievable.
Incredible.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
So number 6, honestly, I think it's one of the ones that I was like really stoked to see, which is Sister Rosetta Tharpe.
Yep.
She's the highest ranked woman on the list. Again, a super diverse list. There are tons of women on this list, but her being number 6, I think, is just as important as seeing Robert Johnson
Yes.
and all of these other innovators, these massive, influential, and not necessarily people who got their due.
No.
In their day.
For sure not. No, but big time blues innovators and originators. And yeah, B.B. King, because he knew Sister Rosetta Tharpe.
Yeah. Before rock and roll even existed, she also practically invented the concept of a guitar hero.
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And if you've never listened to Strange Things Happening Every Day, you should go look it up.
Gotta go do it.
And I would say that, like, if you see somebody on this list, if you go on to Rolling Stone, every single one of them have tracks that you should check out.
Yep.
And I would highly recommend doing that if you're curious. I did that for Snail Mail and found this absolutely gorgeous album that I listened to all evening. So I think that'd be well worth your while.
Yep.
Number 5, Jeff Beck.
Argue with that.
This is, again, a hot take. He was never really my cup of tea. I respect his musicianship, and while his stuff didn't speak to me, I absolutely have no quibbles with him being this high up the list.
Yeah. Number 4, EVH.
Number 4.
I mean,
it's a little hard considering he's not number 1. I know there's a bunch of people out there who are like, okay, it's Mount Rushmore, and it's just Eddie Van Halen's face 4 times.
Right. Right. Well, he so defined what rock guitarist is. Like, he's the template that everybody looks back
the prototype,
to.
100%. But above him, you've got pretty heavy hitters. Jimmy Page, we already covered that.
We've talked about that.
Let me not dig myself into any bigger of a hole. Number 2, Chuck Berry. Again, he deserves to be where he's at.
Every bit of it.
Now, I will say this, and I wanted to call out another one. When you are looking at musicians and their body of work, you also sometimes have to wrestle with who they were as a person.
Yes.
At 148, Ike Turner is on that list, and literally, like, the first thing in the paragraph is, Ike Turner was a terrible person. Yeah. Let's not mince words.
Right.
I thought that was worth calling out because I just thought that was funny. But
sure. Now,
so yes,
as we go into number 1, I was mentioning to my wife that we were going to have this conversation today, and she was like, "Well, who's number 1?" And I said, "Jimi Hendrix." And she said, "Well, I don't care about anything else on the list then." Like, Jimi Hendrix would be number 1. I literally don't care about the other 249. I'd fight you if it wasn't Jimi Hendrix at the top of the list. But since it is, I'm cool, and I honestly get it.
Yeah, I if you look at somebody's creative output over the course of their career, and again, he only had 8 years
in his
to do
case,
it, but he did something that had never been done before, and justifiably, he made his way to the upper echelon of the industry. He was the highest paid musician by the time he passed away. But I don't think anybody has had so much influence on everybody that came after them as Jimi Hendrix. The jewelry and the clothing and the mannerisms and just the general vibe, like the prototype. 1.0, but also kind of like not necessarily alpha, but gold master also.
Yes.
Because there aren't many other people who came after him who did it better than he did.
Right. I remember a quote from, I think it was Steve Vai, saying, "I'm pretty good at guitar. When I hear a Jimi Hendrix record, I know what he's doing, but I have no idea in a lot of cases why he's doing it." And like, that just says the whole thing. He's a pentatonic player. He's not super flashy. He's not, high octane. He's no Eddie Van Halen in terms of, he wouldn't play Eruption. It wouldn't be him. But the choices he made, the way that he built chords, the way that he embellished chords, just nobody had ever done that before. And really, it's hard to think of anybody who's done it since.
And the way that you have to kind of acknowledge that none of what came through him existed until he made it happen.
Right.
And that's really what you have to kind of look at, especially when you're looking at like these top 10 musicians. So like Eddie Van Halen, he took all the things that came before him, but he did something that nobody else had done up to that point.
That's right.
In the way that he could do it.
That's right.
And, we always talk about the way that we play is we just kind of are an amalgamation of our influences. And some of us pick up skills better than others. And some people can take all of that acquired knowledge and wrap it up in something totally unique that's never been existed before.
Yeah, we've talked about the people on this list who are blues influenced, right? And a lot of them fundamentally what they're still playing is blues. Jimmy, very blues influenced, and then he soaked it in acid and launched it to the moon. Like it's unlike anything that's happened before.
Yeah.
You can hear the blues influence behind it sometimes, a lot of the time, but he's taking it to places that really nobody ever went before and opened up a whole new world for guitar.
And so, yeah, I mean, when you're talking about a 250 person list, you can argue over the bottom 120, and it doesn't really matter.
Right.
Because ultimately the top 10, top 5 are the ones that like people are really going to care about.
Yep.
And I'm not sure how these kinds of conversations go when they're like compiling the list. I guarantee you there's some pretty heated discussions trying to make these final calls.
I would think. Although at the same time, nobody's getting paid to be on this list. So
also fair.
Yeah.
All right. So I would like to now go into folks that weren't on the list that feel like they should be.
Yeah.
Some of these are more contemporary. Some of these are older. But like the fact that Ace Frehley from Kiss wasn't on this list, I found to be surprising.
Yeah.
Because again, you're talking about influence.
Right.
And if you talk to any guitar player that hit their professional stride in the 80s or 90s, Ace Frehley from Kiss is the reason why they started playing guitar. So his influence alone, whether he was the best technical player or came up with the most impressive solos, that remains to be, seen.
Well,
but,
I mean, part of the fun of the band was that it wasn't impressive. It was, it was bad.
I mean,
it was like not
no,
great.
he had a very unique style that fit that band perfectly.
Yes.
And the stuff that he was able to put together for the group, especially in that first run before they like kind of lost the plot, is truly impressive. I defy you to watch them doing Black Diamond in like 1974 and not be impressed with what you're seeing, because it is impressive.
Fair.
More contemporary. I feel like Marcus King should be on there. I feel like he is in the realm of Kingfish and some of these more modern blues players that is doing super impressive work and should get more due than he's getting.
Yep.
He's also a devastatingly good singer. The guy is incredible. Guthrie Govan is not on this list.
Yeah, I was upset about that. To be fair, I'm not sure how well known outside guitar culture he is. Very well known inside guitar culture, but I'm not sure he has much of a mainstream presence, which is a shame because in a lot of ways he is sort of the inheritor of what Eddie Van Halen was doing. Very, very technical, but also very artistic.
Yeah, one of those guys that just like onboarded all of this data and is able to like blurt out new unique stuff. And there were definitely a bunch of people that I picked in the quote unquote guitar world. John Petrucci, I feel like deserves to be on here.
Yes.
And then basically everybody else that I picked on this list is just fans of John Petrucci.
Yeah, right.
So like Misha Mansour from Periphery, Jason Richardson, who is a insane metal guitar player. John Five, from a versatility standpoint, skill set, I mean, he's played with tons of different artists. He's got a really unique body of work. I feel like he deserves to be up there. And then I got here are my two dark horses. Okay.
Go.
Brent Hines from Mastodon. Because I just don't think there's not many people out today that just play like the guitar was like inserted into their hands the second they were born. Like he just plays in a way that is incomprehensibly him.
Yeah.
And if he's playing on a song, it's him. That's just what he is. And on a similar note, Corey Wong, who I think has absolutely captured the imagination of modern guitar players with the simplicity and the cleanliness, I guess, of his playing. Very conservative playing in a very technical, precise way, but is still accessible and not, I would say, self-indulgent like, every other guitar player I just mentioned.
Right.
So those are my picks for glaring omissions. Do you have any other ones you want to throw out?
No, you nailed it. I was there were a few I was looking for, but Guthrie was the one who most raised to the surface for me.
Awesome. Yeah. All right, guys, that's our take on the list. Highly recommend you check it out. If there are any people that are too high up the list or people that you thought got robbed, let us know about it. Coverbandconfidential@gmail.com. Leave a comment. Let us know, because I mean, this is the stuff that we would do in our free time. We have the luxury of sharing it with you guys.
Yeah.
So if you're mad at us, I mean,
that's it. No, that's really it. Send us your, hey, how dare you? Send us your how dare yous.
Love that. I can't wait.
Yeah.
Cannot wait. You just can't help yourself.
No.
You truly can't.
Yeah, I had a whole adrenaline thing going on as I'm reading this.
Yeah, I'm liking how we kind of like settled.
Yeah.
My blood pressure was definitely a lot higher about 20 minutes ago.
Right.